I'm using inexpensive watercolor paper. This isn't the really good 100% rag paper that costs a lot of money. This is just some inexpensive Canson paper, and it's pretty good. You know, it's good for a lot of the types of projects that I'll be showing you how to do later on. And like here's some watercolors that I did for the modern calligraphy, and I use this paper, and it worked very well for that. So I'm going to show you these techniques that I used here to create these sheets, and we'll also use them for some other projects like this cool butterfly clip that I just made a page of watercolor, and you can use it to make cards. Like here's a little note card that would make a nice thank you note or something like that. So the techniques for this are pretty easy. Now you can use, these are watercolors that you can just get these almost anywhere at CVS or the supermarket. I like watercolors that come in tubes, so I've got my palette set up here with tube watercolors. And I've already taken some of this watercolor paper and cut it into different sizes. So this is a full sheet. It's 9 inches by 12 inches. This is half of a sheet. So 6 inches by 9 inches. And this is a quarter of a sheet, which is 4.5 inches by 6 inches. So the card that I just showed you, that's this size sheet right here, so the quarter size, and these are the half size sheet right here. So so yeah, we'll start with a big full sheet, and I'll show you some techniques. So I like to use colors that are next to each other on the color wheel. Those are called analogous colors. So I'm just going to use some red, orange, and yellow on this one. Nice warm colors. So I've got some naphthol red here. Oops, I don't know what that is, but we'll get rid of it. And for this type of project, I like to use a big brush. If you try to do this with a small brush, it's going to dry so fast you'll have a hard time going from one color to another. So here's a type of yellow. This is New Gamboge is the name of this color. And you can see where the red and yellow go together. They make orangey colors. So I'm just trying to spread it all out on the surface. And if you're going to do a number of projects with this, it's kind of fun to sit down and make like 4 or 5 of these big sheets and 4 or 5 of the half-size sheets, and then you're ready to do a lot of different projects. You've got paper for when you want it and need it later on. So since the red was a really strong color, I didn't need as much of that as I do with the yellow. So if you want, you can just, sometimes I'll pick up my paper and just let the colors blur and blend. You can see there's a lot of blurring going on right here. And if things aren't really moving around too much, you can use a spray bottle. This is an old hairspray bottle that I'm repurposing. You can also just buy a spray bottle from the dollar store or something like that. But even just mingling these colors together looks really interesting, just letting them go and drip into each other. So you can use a hairdryer if you wanted to dry this, you like the look of it and you want it to dry, or you can just kind of let it sit and dry. You want to be careful not to drip on something that you're not supposed to, so you can put out some newspapers if you need to let your watercolors dry on. And if you want to make some more interesting things happen, like sometimes I'll just shake on a little bit of water from my brush. Make make some little spots happen. So I'm just going to set that aside for right now, and I'll be done with that one. So I'll do some of the half sheet sizes. Oops, where did I put it? Oh, right here. So this time I'll use hues of blues. This color right here is called Cobalt Turquoise. It feels so undersea. So I'll mix that with some ultramarine blue. That's a nice deep blue color. And just do the same thing with that. Let those colors mingle together. Got some kind of little smooch right here I'll try to take off. So if you've done watercolors with me before, you might have seen me use some salt on the watercolors. Salt has a special effect that happens when you use it. So this one here, this is what the salt looks like when you use it. And actually, this isn't even a watercolor. I'll tell you about this later. But this sort of sparkly effect that's happening there, that's from salt. And you can use kosher salt, or this is ordinary table salt. And just kind of shake it on your watercolor. So one thing that it does do is it kind of hangs onto the water a little bit more. So this will take longer to dry on its own than the original watercolor that I did, which it's, I'm looking at it now, it's still pretty interesting, but let it drip a little bit more. So I'm going to set that one aside, and I'll come back to that and show you what happens with the salt. So if you still wanted to do kind of playing with color like this, but you didn't have a set of watercolors, you can use markers. These are ordinary Crayola markers. You just use them on your paper. These have both been used a lot before, so they're not really working all that good, but it doesn't really matter. As I'm doing that, I'm probably shaking the camera a whole lot. Sorry about that. That was like an earthquake. So just using the colors like this, I've put ordinary water on my brush, and I can come in and wet it. And it mingles together just like our watercolors did. And the more you kind of use the brush to disturb that marker underneath, the less likely you are to see these little lines that I put in there when I was putting the marker on. So you still might see some of them, but you know, let's assume that that's part of the charm of how it's ultimately going to look. So I just add a little water to that to get it really flowing around. And if you're going to use marker to do lettering on top of this later on, or other things to it, just be mindful. You don't want to get too dark if you're going to do some writing on top of it. Keep it light and watercolory. So that's a good thing to do. So another technique that you can do, and you can do this with both the watercolor type and the marker type is to use some plastic wrap. So this is ordinary plastic wrap like you use to cover food in the refrigerator with. And I've got a couple of sheets here. So what you do is you put some watercolor on paper. So I'll use my regular watercolors this time. We'll do some greens on there this time. And one of the things I like about this technique is you can kind of see what's going to happen before it actually happens. Every time I dip into yellow, I rinse my brush because it can get polluted really fast with other colors. I think I'll put some of that nice cobalt turquoise in this one too. So you see I'm using a lot of water when I'm doing this. So I'll rinse out my brush, and then I'm going to do a little bit of tilting to make the watercolors mingle together. And I like the way that looks. So even though I've got a couple little spaces in here, I'm not worried about that. So I'm gonna take my plastic wrap and I spread it out a little bit and lay it on there. And if you've put it thin like this, it's not going to be much of an effect. It's when you kind of crinkle it up like this that you really get some special effects. So what you see right here is what it will look like after it's dried a little bit. You don't have to let it completely dry, but let it dry a little bit. And it will come out with this sort of, it almost looks like broken glass to me. So I'll peel it up just a little so I can rearrange it. You've got a little bit of time that you can mess with that. And then I just, once I figure, yeah, I like that, I leave it and I put it aside. So we'll just let that kind of happen for a few minutes. So now the salt here, this was the one that I did that I put the salt on, and you can see the salt has started to have an effect in the watercolor. And you can get a similar effect to this if you spritz when the watercolor is almost dry. So very similar looking effect. Here's the first one that we did, and it's not quite dry yet, but it's getting there. And there's a lot of parts that are dry, like it's dry over here, it's dry here, it's dry there, but it's very wet right there. If you wanted to take some plastic wrap and put it on there and just do a special effect in one part, you can do that too. So let me put that down in that wet area, kind of smush it around a little bit. And we'll set that aside. And here's the one that was just done with marker. So that's looking really, really interesting right now. So I'm going to let these dry for a few minutes and I'll come back and we'll peel off the plastic wrap and you can see that effect. So these watercolors have dried a little bit. And I'm going to peel it up and you'll see that on this one it's kind of a subtle effect that we got from the plastic wrap, but it's very pretty. I think especially for making those butterflies that would be a nice effect. And this one, I think the colors are soft enough that even doing calligraphy over this would look really cool. So see how the pattern that you see here when I peel it up, it's very similar to the pattern that's left behind when you peel it up, but that's got it almost looks like broken glass to me, so I love that look. And then there is the salt effect completely dry. Before you try to do any calligraphy or anything like that on that, you need to take the salt completely off. So I usually use a little piece of credit card or some kind of hard edge to scrape it off here. Get a ruler to do it, so you can use a ruler to take the salt off. Otherwise it will interfere with the lettering that you're trying to do on it. So you can feel it with your fingers. If you can still feel it's rough, then just continue to scrape it off. This one here doesn't have as much salt on it. It kind of melted in, so I actually can brush that right off with my hand. But I love that. It looks like mystical clouds or nebulas in space or something. And this one was just done with markers. So that's amazing. People would just think that that was a watercolor. If your paper curls a little bit, like this one is trying to curl up a bit, I just use my fingers to kind of bend it the other way and get it to flatten out a bit. So that's how you do some abstracted watercolors for projects. Have fun experimenting, and I can't wait to see what you do.